going to shift now to our second topic, the police-involved shooting and resulting civil unrest. I wanted to remind all of the members of the media who have been logged in that you need to ensure that your Zoom login name includes your full name and media affiliation. And you can do that by mousing over the word more in the participants list and selecting rename. Anyone without listing their full name and affiliation will not be called upon. And with that, let's turn things over for some comments from Mayor Jim Kenney. Mayor, you have the floor.
Thanks, Mike, and good afternoon, everyone. As I said in my statement I issued last night, my prayers are with the family and friends of Walter Wallace Jr. I had the opportunity to speak briefly last evening with his wife, mother, and father, and obviously this was a heart-wrenching moment for everyone. I have children that age, and I cannot imagine their heartbreak. I promised them to continue to reach out and to hear their concerns firsthand and to answer their questions to the extent that I am able. Like many of us, I have watched the video of this tragic incident, and it presents difficult questions that must be answered. The officer-involved shooting investigation unit of the Philadelphia Police Department will conduct a full investigation. I have confidence in their ability to carry this out. We need a speedy and transparent resolution for the sake of Mr. Wallace, his family, the officers, and for all of Philadelphia. Last night, we saw further evidence of the anguish of Black and brown residents of our city who have struggled their entire lives under systemic racism. I've said many times, I've lived my life as a white man, enjoying all the privileges that brings. So I cannot truly fathom the reality so many fellow Philadelphians of color have endured, and how a tragic incident last night can feel yet again like our systems fail to protect Black men. But my commitment to understanding that anguish and to accomplishing truly lasting reforms is unwavering. I am resolved to devote every remaining day in this office to bringing about justice and true equity to the city. That's why we established the Pathways to Reform and Reconciliation Steering Committee a few months ago to enact meaningful change. I'll be meeting with members of this group this week, specifically about last night's tragedy, so they can continue to help us move forward and advance our reform agenda. We'll also continue to coordinate with our Office of Public Engagement, particularly its Office of Black Male Engagement and the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion to keep the community informed. I thank all the Philadelphia leaders who have joined us in a shared call for peace in our city. And I extend my best wishes to the officers who were injured last night, especially the police officer who was hurt after being hit by a vehicle. I wish them all a speedy recovery. Finally, I want to acknowledge the other community members, including business owners along 52nd Street and in the surrounding areas that are now suffering once again due to some of the damage caused last night. I know that many Philadelphians are feeling frustrated and outraged following yesterday's tragic incident. I fully support your First Amendment rights to protest, but we also want to ensure that our communities are not further hurt as a result. Please be careful. Now I turn this over to Police Commissioner Outlaw.
Commissioner, do we have you there? We're not hearing you. Commissioner? Commissioner, you'll need to unmute and activate your camera if you could. At the very least, unmute. Commissioner, we cannot hear you. I don't know if you can hear us. All right, we're going to ask everyone to hang tight, and we're going to try to see if we can. I know the commissioner is logged in, so let us see if we can get it working on her end. Again, our apologies. We are attempting to work out some technical issues with the police commissioner. Let's try this one more time. Commissioner Outlaw?
Can you hear me?
You bet.
All right.
And we don't see you. I know the television folks who are logged in would prefer to have video. There we go.
Yep.
All right. We appreciate it.
I apologize for that.
Yeah, no problem at all. Things happen, and obviously I think quite hectic. We just heard from Mayor Jim Kenney. We know that you wanted to make some opening remarks.
Yes, and thank you. Good afternoon. I echo the mayor's sentiments and share in his grief for the loss of Walter Wallace. As I shared with the family last night, I extend my deepest condolences to Mr. Wallace's family, friends, neighbors, and community members, and we're all praying for each of you during this difficult time. As I mentioned in my statement last night, I have directed the officer-involved shooting investigation unit to begin its investigation. There are many questions that demand answers. Residents have my assurance that those questions will be fully addressed by the investigation. While at the scene last night, the anger and sadness of the community was not lost upon me. Everyone involved, including the officers, will forever be impacted by this tragedy. I plan to join the mayor in meeting with members of the community and members of Mr. Wallace's family to hear their concerns. I will also be participating in a community meeting this evening to hear residents' feedback. And we plan to work with local organizations and the administration to host several other meetings in the coming days. We are also evaluating what other important information will be made public as the investigation unfolds, as well as our timeline for doing so. First, we'll be completing a threat assessment and determining if and when we can release the officers' names. We know that the public deserves this information. As a matter of department policy, we plan to release it as long as it does not put the officer's safety at risk. We're also examining what other evidence can be shared as long as it does not undermine the integrity of the ongoing investigation. In a moment, I'm going to provide an update into the events that transpired yesterday afternoon into this morning. However, it is important that I reiterate a very important distinction. Yesterday, individuals throughout the city came together to peacefully protest. The criminal activity that occurred throughout the city was not a part of these protests, and it did not serve any legitimate purpose. I would like to acknowledge and thank our officers as well as our community partners for their commitment to their communities as well as the restoration of order. At this point, we are able to present the following updates. At approximately last night, originally starting at Malcolm X Park as a peaceful protest, as I said, incidents of civil unrest began to spread throughout surrounding residential neighborhoods and business corridors around the 18th Police District at 55th and Pine, as well as the 52nd Street corridor. As a result, 30 officers were injured. 29 of those have been treated and released, and the majority of these officers suffered various cuts and bruises after being struck by projectiles, mainly bricks, rocks, and other debris. There was one sergeant who is still hospitalized with a broken leg after she was intentionally run over by an individual driving a pickup truck. As I stated, she is currently hospitalized and unfortunately is in stable condition. There was damage to several PPD vehicles, 8 to be exact, one of those 8 were set on fire, and the other vehicles sustained various vandalism and damaged windshields and other windows. There was also one fire department vehicle, a medic unit windshield that was vandalized. Moving on to arrests, there were a total of 91. Arrest numbers from the civil unrest from October 26th going into the morning of October 27th represent all persons actually charged at this time. There were 3 CVNs for failure to disperse. There were 11 assaults on police, 76 arrests for burglary, including 3 with guns. There are still several ongoing investigations not included in the above numbers. So as time progresses, the numbers will be adjusted accordingly. For today and this evening, we anticipate the chance of additional incidents of civil unrest. And as such, we will be taking additional steps to ensure order. We will increase officer presence around the city at key locations. Roving and static officer details that are part of the looting response team will also be deployed to commercial districts and other key locations throughout the city. Police traffic patrol will be in place for any demonstrations that develop. We've also requested mutual aid assistance from surrounding counties and the state to help bolster our own personnel. Thank you for your time today. And with that, I'm open for any questions. I also have Chief Inspector Frank Venor with us if there are any specific questions regarding the officer-involved shooting investigation.
Thank you, Commissioner. And as we indicated, because of limited time and the sheer number of reporters with questions, we ask that you limit your questions to no more than 2. Let's start by going back to Victor Fiorello of Philadelphia Magazine.
Good afternoon, Commissioner Outlaw. I have 2 quick questions for you. First, you mentioned the number of burglaries. Can I assume you're referring to commercial burglaries?
Yes.
Second question, can you commit to release the full body cam footage in the next 72 hours, as many jurisdictions around the country have done after incidents like this? And if not, why not?
So as I stated before, I acknowledge the importance of getting as much information out as possible in the shortest amount of time as possible. We are currently reviewing everything that we have right now to ensure what we can release and by when we can do that. I can commit to releasing information, or actually commit to communicating what information will be released within the next 48 to 72 hours. Whether or not that body-worn camera footage will be a part of that, I don't know at this point in the day. But again, I am committed to being as transparent as possible.
So in 48 hours, you'll be able to tell us if and when you're releasing the body cam footage?
I hope to be able to.
Thank you.
I don't have a concrete answer for you right now.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Victor. And I completely neglected to mention that we are also joined by Commerce Director Sylvie Gaillard-Howard if there are questions related to the impact on the business community. Let's go now to Mitch Blocker of NBC 10.
Good afternoon, Commissioner. Police radio indicates that police were familiar with Locust Street and potentially Mr. Wallace. I'm curious, how many times had police been there? Why had they been there previously? What exactly did you know about Mr. Wallace yesterday?
Go ahead.
It's okay. I mentioned earlier that there are several questions that need to be answered, and that the question you just asked is something that we're considering, including what the officers knew at the time that they responded, what was put out by radio, and again, you know, how any previous contact with Mr. Wallace factored into what happened yesterday. Chief Venor, is there anything else you want to say on that?
Good afternoon. I'm not sure if you could hear me.
Yes, we got you. Go ahead.
What I did want to say in reference to that is we're under the guidelines of specific rules in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania about when we get talk to the officers get discharged. So until we're able to interview them, it's part of the active case. But we don't know, as the commissioner said, what they knew going into this, and all the other evidence we're in the process of reviewing: video, interviews with eyewitnesses, as well as any other physical evidence that we recovered at the scene.
Thank you.
Inspector, for those reporters who haven't worked with you before, if you could give us your full name and spelling.
Sure. I'm Chief Inspector Frank Van Oor, V-A-N-O-R-E.
Mr. Mayor, you said that you've seen the video. What questions did it raise for you?
I really don't want to get ahead of the police investigation at this point. There were just issues, maybe look twice, but we will have more to say on that as we get through the investigation and can release more. I don't want to jeopardize any evidence by just, seeing someone shot is a very upsetting thing.
Do you believe that it's possible to investigate this case in a bubble in terms of, the social climate, the very public video of Mr. Wallace's death? How do you think that impacts the investigation?
I think that we need to follow the rules as Chief Inspector Van Oor talked about relative to the Commonwealth and when we can do certain things. And I also trust Commissioner Outlaw to release the information when it's appropriate to release it.
And if I can chime in on that question, I don't think we are investigating this in a bubble. Obviously, this chat just happened last night. A lot of us didn't leave here until 6 o'clock this morning, and some of us a little bit later. All of these are continuing events, and it's continuing to unfold. As we continue to put our evidence together, whether it's witness statements, involved officer statements, we'll have more information over time. So our intent by any means to be tight-lipped or closed-mouthed about what we do know and when, but we have to be very prudent in ensuring that we respect officers' due process, but also ensure that we don't put the cart before the horse and misspeak and then have to come out later and retract anything that we said because evidence proves something different. So please don't mistake us being intentionally cautious about what we're saying as an effort to withhold information. Again, there is a process in place, and we are bound by certain laws to ensure that the rights of the involved officers are respected while balancing the needs of community, which is why we're meeting with community members and we'll be hosting listening sessions to make ourselves open and available to the public.
All right, thank you, Mitch. Let's go now to Christian Johansson of KYW.
Hi there, Commissioner. One question is that we've had questions around whether or not this was.
Put it up on Latico. Thank you.
Sorry. Okay, can you hear me? That this was also a domestic disturbance call. Based on police protocol, we also understand the police officers did not have tasers. Is it typical standard protocol for armed police officers, you could say, to go to domestic disturbance calls? And also, why don't all police officers have tasers?
So these are very good questions. And these are, we all know, well, I guess every police officer is not funding. So we could continue to outfit our officers with tasers. Some time ago, we deployed tasers along with training. And it was made very clear on arrival here that we needed to ensure that everyone, and I mean specific CIT training, it was made clear to me upon my arrival here that everyone needs to have a taser or an ECW, an electronic control weapon, assigned to them, and not have that in tandem with other training provided because it's a separate tool on our tool belt. With that said, these officers had not been deployed tasers, as is the case with many other officers here in the department, and we are continuing to roll out the program as it relates to that. So with that said, yes, it's common for officers to respond to or any type of call with a gun because it's one of the tools that we carry on our tool belt.
And my second question is just with the de-escalation training, has the mayor, maybe the mayor can answer, have you guys been through that de-escalation training? And is there any insight to trying to overhaul that or maybe look at it from a different angle, because this seems to be a situation where it involves a de-escalation?
Yeah, so I will say this, de-escalation training has evolved over the years. I've been in contact as recently as this morning with the Police Executive Research Forum, who rolls out ICAT training, the ICAT, again, is not only communications, but it's a critical decision-making model that a lot of departments have transitioned to, and incorporating that into their training, whether it's classroom-based or scenario-based training. I brought it with me and introduced it in my previous role as a chief of police, and it's something that I'm looking into bringing here. So it doesn't mean that we haven't had de-escalation training, but I think as the times change and the type of interactions that we're seeing and the types of calls that we're required to respond to in today's climate, we have to adapt our training along with that, and we will be doing that.
Okay, thank you, Kristen. And let's go now to Martin Pratt of Philly YBN.
Commissioner, it's been reported that the call that was received was a mental health call. Is that correct?
I can't confirm that. Either way, again, we're still backtracking to find out what the officers knew and what was dispatched to the officers at the time that they arrived on scene.
Second question, if someone is experiencing or family members are experiencing family members who are having a mental health issue, what would you suggest the call to 911 contain so that that does not happen?
We ask for, and then there's training components to this, right? So we have asked of the community dispatcher, but we also have to take a look back and see what our dispatchers are asking when folks call. Because when folks call, they may be in crisis or they're experiencing a critical incident, and they might not be able to spout out that information. So we have to rethink the types of questions that we ask as well. But to answer your question, I think it's important to just give a full history in layperson speak, what's going on, if there are any weapons involved, if there's a history of the involved person trying to hurt themselves or others, layout of the house. Typically, we like for folks to come outside of the residence or the facility if possible. But again, as much detail as possible. If typically they've been violent in the past, or they haven't been violent in the past ever, but today they are. As much information that we have to help us determine our response while we're en route there is extremely helpful. And we, on our end, again, I think we released that at the end of September. During the day, because it's a pilot program, we now have a behavioral health specialist in our radio room, but only working limited hours. This person was not working at the time this call came out, but this person will assist us. And as this program grows, this person will assist us with triaging calls to determine the most appropriate response, whether or not a police response important, or maybe even a co-response with other providers are appropriate. But these are certainly things that we're paying attention to now.
So there's nobody mobile that goes out with?
Not through the police department, no.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you, Martin. Let's go to Laura McChrystal of the Inquirer.
Hi there. My first question for the police commissioner, had either of the officers who fired at Walter Wallace ever responded to a call for service at his house before, whether it be that same day yesterday or a previous day?
I don't know if those officers have. I'm not prepared to answer that right now.
Okay. And my second question, we have heard National Guard members saying that they are being called up or deployed in some way in the city. I am a bit unclear on whether that might be for an election-related response or for protests related to yesterday's shooting. Is there anything you can tell us on National Guard movement in the city?
Yeah, the mayor can chime in if need be. But like I said, we have put out a request for mutual aid. And when we called for National Guard in the past, the request was to assist us with security of critical infrastructures, and also among the commercial corridors what we'd seen historically meaning in the last few months, where there had been looting and or rioting. So we are exploring all of our options at this time to do everything that we can to ensure that all of our PPD resources are focused on what's in front of us, whether it's the actual civil unrest, or even, again, the crime that continues to occur throughout the city, the shootings and the homicides. So we can focus on calls for service and directly dealing with community, and then allowing for mutual aid resources, again, to be a highly visible presence in these areas, understanding that we cannot be in all places at one time.
And it's my understanding that the conversations with the governor about the National Guard have been based mostly in the election. This incident is a tragic incident that happened yesterday. So those conversations were ongoing relative to the election and the potential fallout from that.
And I think we need to be realistic in that, just given the proximity in time, that there may be some bleeding together, just given the timeline as far as how close we are to Election Day and the days after.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Let's go to Jack Tomzik of Metro.
Hello. Yes, this is for Commissioner Outlaw. There was a video release and there's been a lot of speculation on that and about the distance between the officers and Walter Wallace. You probably can't speak specifically to this instance, but what is the distance where someone poses immediate threat if they're not armed with a gun?
It depends. And I want to be very clear, and the law does not allow us to utilize hindsight. But it really is about what the involved officer perceived, experienced, what they were thinking at the time they made the decision to use force. And then any subsequent investigation looks at whether or not, looks at totality of circumstances, but also determines whether or not use was proportionate and was reasonable and necessary.
Okay, and is there any information you can provide about how many shots were fired or how many bullet wounds that Mr. Wallace suffered?
Chief Benoorn, you want to address that?
Yeah, we know each officer fired approximately 7 rounds, but that's all we know. We don't know how many hit the individual or not. That's all being part of the active investigation. But we processed that many rounds at the scene, and we're still reviewing all the evidence.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Jack. Let's go now to Mark Morales of CNN. Mark, you'll have to unmute yourself, please.
Hi, everybody. Just unmuted. Can you guys hear me?
Yep, go ahead.
Hi there. So I wanted to know specifics about the incident as it happened. Approximately what was that distance that Mr. Wallace was from the police? What type of knife did he have? And at what point did he actually, excuse me one second. I'm sorry about that. And at any point did he actually lunge at the officers, or was it that he was ignoring commands?
Chief.
Yeah, like I said, the details of the investigation at this time are being gathered by the Officer Involved Shooting Investigative Unit, along with the to them. As far as the distance and how that's measured by our crime scene unit, I don't have the answers to exactly the location where he was and they were at that exact moment in time. All of them details, like the Commissioner said, this happened less than 24 hours ago, so are still being put together, and we're going to present them to the DA so that they can make the best decisions as the case moves forward.
Mark, did you have anything else?
Yeah, I just wanted to get a little bit more clarification as to, anything you could say as to what prompted the officers to open fire. Was there did Mr. Wallace say anything? Were there any commands that he didn't listen to? Like, what was it that exactly made them pull the trigger?
I know that information would be helpful, but having not even interviewed the officers yet, we were in no position to be able to answer that question. And anything at this point would be short-sighted and speculatory.
All right, thank you, Mark. Let's go now to Jeff Cole of Fox 29.
Yeah, question to start with Commissioner Outlaw. Commissioner Outlaw, was there a supervisor sent along with what appear to be 2 young officers without tasers when they came to this call? And is that protocol?
I think it's a good question. We do know that a supervisor arrived on scene shortly thereafter. But again, I do not know timeline-wise whether or not a supervisor either self-initiated and was en route or was dispatched because of that.
Is it required for a supervisor to go when there's a call for a man with a weapon? I think this did include some sort of warning that this man had a weapon. Was the supervisor supposed to be along with him?
I do not believe, and again, do not quote me on this, I do not believe that there is that it's a requirement for a supervisor to respond because we get so many calls like that. However, moving forward, if this is something that does need to be codified and strengthened in our directives, it will be. And making sure, again, that a supervisor is not only en route, but a supervisor is available with additional alternatives to alternative response and for coordination of the scene upon arrival.
Last question, Commissioner. It does appear that the man's mother is urging officers not to shoot him, not to shoot him. Are officers asked to take that into account if they're hearing that from a family member or someone in the scene who may know him?
You know, I will say this, we're all human beings, right? And again, when we train, we're talking about totality of the circumstance. That could very well be present. It could be family members or others pleading. You know, I don't want to Monday morning quarterback because it ultimately all rests upon what the officers experienced at the time that they made the decision to shoot. Different officers, you know, handle scenarios different, right? They might have approached it differently. It doesn't necessarily mean that because of that, what the officers did were improper, but, you know, levels of experience and perspective, you know, lends to how we respond.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Jeff Cole. Let's go to Ryan Briggs of WHYY Plan Philly.
Thanks. Can you guys hear me?
You got it. Go ahead.
So, Commissioner, just speaking generally, I wanted to get a better sense. You know, on a given night in a district like this, how many crisis intervention team officers or officers who were trained in that you know, type of procedure, how many would be on call, and does the department have an issue providing enough crisis intervention officers, you know, just on a day-to-day basis? Does anything like that figure in here?
It does figure in. I don't have the answer for you. We'll have to circle back with you on that to get the exact number, but it absolutely figures in because, again, when we're talking about tools in the tool belt, we want to make sure that, you know, if it's by division or a certain region of the city, if we know that we have a higher level of certain types of calls, we want to make sure that how we deploy the resources that we have available in that respective area aligns with that. So obviously, this is something that we will be considering. The DA's office, when they do their investigation, they're looking at it from a criminal perspective to determine if any laws were broken. But in our administrative investigation, we're not only looking at the shooting itself, but we're looking at what led up to the shooting and the incidents around that, up to and including any risk management issues, if there are any policy changes that need to be made or any training points or areas of training that need immediate attention. So it's far more comprehensive, and the question that you just asked is a part of that evaluation as well.
Does the department's 911 dispatch have the technology or ability to even flag a call that might have a behavioral health component, or direct particular 911 calls to, say, a crisis intervention team?
Yes.
It does have the ability to do that.
You know, I think it goes back to the original question of, you know, the type of information that we get, and are we asking questions to get us the answers that we need as it relates to that. If we get a call about a person with a weapon and no further details are attached with that, we go into it thinking that it's a person with a weapon. And oftentimes when we're dispatched to calls, we don't have the full picture until we get there. So it goes back to the original point about asking probing questions and getting as much info on the front end as we can. If in the event we don't have a lot of details, that's where CIT training or other alternatives to how we communicate come into play that allow us to slow the situation down, if possible, to get additional information there and be more thoughtful about our responses.
And what's the status of the behavioral health program that the department announced last month, I believe? Is that proceeding? Is there any change, or reconsideration given, what happened here, may have happened here in terms of moving along that process?
So we are in talks with the city. We, at this time, do not have a behavioral health program. There are other, through other city entities, behavioral health resources through behavioral health. And we are currently evaluating how we can bring our programs together so we can figure out, hey, do we do a co-responder model or do we not respond at all? All of these things have been underway, but really got some momentum in the last several months. And we're working with the city to determine just really the types of calls that we should be responding to, and if we do, how.
All right, thank you, Brian. Let's go now to Claudia Lauer, the Associated Press.
Hey, thank you for taking questions. Earlier when you said a number of officers don't have tasers, is there any information or numbers that you can share with how many officers or what percentage of officers do or do not have them?
Yeah, Claudia, I'll have to get back to you with that number. I'll have our folks circle back with the exact information.
Okay, and then, I know in the last couple of months, there have been a lot of changes, reforms that have been put in place in terms of use of force. In an ideal, and again, I know you can't talk about the specifics of this situation until the investigation is over, but in an ideal situation, what would have been the steps that should have been taken before use of force?
So again, I'm not going to Monday morning quarterback what happened here. And I know it's very easy by me saying, here's what woulda, coulda, shoulda done could easily be attributed to last night. And I don't want to do that. But again, we will be looking at what happened, what led up to force when any force is used. What led up to the use of force, how much information did we have when the force was used? Was it proportionate to what the officers were perceiving or experiencing at that time? At what point was the force ceased or de-escalated once the threat was either declining or neutralized or no longer present, I should say? What are the other factors there? What are there other community members involved? What's the terrain? What's the environment like? Are you in an open area? Are you inside of a residence? Are you in a small room? There are a lot of factors there, including of the perceived threat. Does that perceived threat have the ability, the intent, the means, and the opportunity to do harm to the officers or others? So again, there's a lot of factors that are taken into account in a very short period of time. And that's what these assessments or these investigations will reveal in the long run. Hopefully in the short term, I would say, not the long run.
All right, thank you, Claudia. Let's go now to Alicia Reed of CBS 3.
Hi, this is for Mayor Kenney. With the number of pharmacies and ATMs that were robbed overnight, and also the stores boarding up today and closing early in an abundance of caution because a lot of them feel there's going to be more of the same tonight. Can you speak to these crimes of opportunity and how that will affect the city in the long term?
Well, we're hoping that we won't have any repeat of what we've seen last night, and we're taking every precaution that we can to be staffed and police manned to avoid that situation that happened last night. We've been through a very difficult time. We recognize that. The end of May, beginning of June was extremely difficult. And I will also say that looting is not protest, and vandalism is not protest. So these are not peaceful protesters. There were a lot of peaceful protesters out there last night, and perhaps over the next week or two. But vandalism and looting is not an acceptable form of First Amendment expression. And we will continue to staff and man our business strips, our strip malls, and our downtown and the stores in the neighborhood to the best of our ability, and make sure that we avoid this again.
And Acting Commerce Director Sylvie Gaillard Howard is with us. So I don't know if you had any thoughts you wanted to add on that.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think that we have not been asking businesses to close, although we do know that some businesses have gotten in touch with us and told us that they're choosing to do so voluntarily, which is totally up to them. We are certainly, we understand businesses are very anxious right now. They already were anxious about the elections prior to this week and the incident that took place. So we are encouraging to be prepared, to have anything like flower pots or kind of movable have it outside if possible.
Thanks. Alicia, did you have another question or are you good?
No, that was it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Let's go now to Emily Cordero of Univision. And Emily, Armando is still with us, I believe, and if you need translation.
Yes, hi. Thank you for having us. Going back to the events that led up to the shooting death of Mr. Wallace, can you guys tell us who made that mental health call to 911 and what was exactly said? Was Mr. Wallace exhibiting some type of erratic behavior? Was he waving this weapon in front of family members or neighbors? Can we get a quick sense of what happened before with that 911 call?
Chief?
We're going to start with Armando.
Yes.
Emily, ¿quieres que tu pregunta sea traducida para tu audiencia de habla hispana?
Sí, ¿quién fue que llamó al 911 para reportar este incidente en la ciudad de Filadelfia? El señor Mr. Wallace estaba con un cuchillo en las afueras de su residencia de vecinos. ¿Qué fue lo que ocurrió en esta llamada? ¿Quién llamó?
The question is who called 911 and whether Mr. Wallace was wielding a knife outside of his home. And earlier she said, was he making threats or exhibiting erratic behavior?
That's all I could tell you very generally, because this is what I have in a summary. The details to this are being reviewed as part of the investigation. Is we've received a radio call for a person screaming and that person was armed with a knife. Who made that call and exactly how many of those calls that we've received, I don't have the details to that yet. And I said that's going to be reviewed. All those calls are recorded. We could review them by listening to them. We also will get a warrant and figure out who the subscriber was so we could formally interview them. And all that's still in process. So we did receive a radio call, but that's all I have in general summary of what the officers had arriving there.
Solamente puedo proporcionarte un resumen muy general de los detalles. Sabemos que se hizo una llamada telefónica sobre una persona que estaba gritando y que portaba un cuchillo. ¿Quién hizo la llamada? ¿Cuántas veces se llamó? Realmente no lo sabemos en este momento. Esto es algo que se va a revisar y se está revisando en cuanto a las grabaciones existentes a las cuales estamos escuchando. También vamos a pedir una orden para poder ver esto en mayor detalle y entrevistar a la persona, y esto está en proceso. Compartiremos mayor información según la tengamos.
Muchas gracias. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Emily. Just to note that we only have a few more minutes left, and so we're going to end questioning with those whose hands are currently raised. Let's go next to Yaima Crespo of Telemundo.
Sí, mi pregunta es para Outlaw. ¿Qué tipo de entrenamiento se le está dando a la policía de Filadelfia en casos de que una persona que se reporte con algún tipo de problema mental, pues se asista de una mejor manera y no se llegue a los disparos?
The question is for Commissioner Outlaw. What type of training is the police department in Philadelphia dealing with cases where there's reports of persons exhibiting mental health conditions so that this has better outcomes?
Thank you. So I think, again, Chief Venor shared the details that came out of the call. We tend to find out more once we get there. But as it relates to someone in crisis or experiencing, it could be crisis or someone under the influence, or they may have disabilities. And sometimes it's very difficult to discern between that upon our arrival. We provide crisis intervention training to our officers to ensure that there is a focus not only on de-escalation, but slowing things down if situations allow for that, to slow things down, to create time and distance, to establish lines of communication, whether it's and again, in an effort to contain and create distance and space to find out as much as we can in an effort to communicate and find alternative resolutions. This is on training that we do roll out, but as I mentioned before, there's always room. We are a learning organization. There is always room to enhance or improve our critical decision-making models and any training associated with that. Because again, this training is not only helpful for dealing with someone in crisis, but there's a strong focus and emphasis on interpersonal skills to slow situations down. That said, we may, having all these amazing tools available to us, we may find ourselves in situations where it escalates rather quickly and we don't have the necessary time to go through all of those steps.
Bien, quiero básicamente agradecerte por la pregunta. Como ya lo dijo el Chief Lenore, nosotros tenemos en estos momentos el estudio de esta llamada para poder exactamente qué es lo que sucedió, que vamos a averiguarlo luego. Pero cuando alguien está en crisis o se encuentra bajo la influencia de sustancias o tiene incapacidades de salud mental, es difícil discernir en esos momentos qué es lo que se está sucediendo. Y damos capacitación en cuanto a intervención en situaciones de crisis para desescalar la tensión y para poder bajarle la velocidad a las cosas y manejarlas de una mejor manera, establecer una distancia en tiempo y en espacio. También tratamos de encontrar personas en quien se pueda confiar, que estén ya presentes en la escena de los incidentes para contener esto, para poner, como dije, mayor tiempo y distancia. Pero tratamos también de encontrar alternativas para resolver los casos de una forma continua. Hay capacitación que comprende, mejor dicho, el aprendizaje, la mejora y el avance de las situaciones en el momento de la toma de decisiones, que es algo que es útil en situaciones de crisis. Pero nuevamente, el desarrollo de las capacidades interpersonales como una herramienta para tratar de escalar una situación se tiene que aplicar rápidamente. Nosotros vamos a seguir aprendiendo de ello e incorporando esto a la capacitación que se les da a los oficiales de policía.
Emma, are you all set?
Thank you.
Very good. All right, we're going to go next to Kennedy Rose. After that, Dan Patrick and Michaela Winberg, and then we'll wrap. So Kennedy Rose of the Journal, you're up.
Hi, my first question is for Sylvie from the Commerce Department. I was wondering, in addition to the recommendations of asking businesses to bring large flower pots or outdoor furniture indoors, is the city doing anything else to help businesses affected or that could be affected by looters or damage?
Yeah, thanks, Kennedy. So at this point, we are in touch with all of our partners that have boots on the ground, like our CDCs, our business improvement districts, to assess the damage. And I will say there is damage certainly beyond 52nd Street, at least I know of at least 8-9 other corridors that have been impacted, if not more. So, at this point, we're really just advising that precautions be taken, and we'll sort of see what we can do moving forward.
Kennedy, I apologize. I accidentally muted you there. If you could unmute yourself and then...
No worries. My second question was for Commissioner Outlaw. I was wondering which commercial corridors will have increased patrols, and I was wondering how does PPD determine that?
So we can push something out a little bit later with additional details. I will tell you the commercial corridors that we will be focusing on are the ones where we had some issues at the end of May, early June. Specifically for tonight, there will be a lot of concentration on the areas where we know there are planned events and there's potential for pop-up protests, which is back in the West Philadelphia area around that 52nd corridor and around the 18th Police District. But again, given that we know, I keep saying historically, but it was just a few months ago, that there was some unrest, there were vandalisms scattered throughout the city, including Center City. We will be diligent in ensuring that there are resources in those areas that were victimized before.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you, Kennedy. Let's go to Dan Patrick of 6ABC.
Hi, my first question is for the Commissioner. Regarding the people that were arrested, do you have demographics on them? We're hearing word that they may not be from that neighborhood. A lot of leaders in that neighborhood are telling us they are doers from somewhere else, as if they use this opportunity to go cause civil unrest. Do you guys see anything in terms of that?
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. We'll have to circle back with you on that as far as their residences or where they're from. But that was our general sense, speaking anecdotally. We tend to not like to speak anecdotally, but I will tell you that the crowd that were out there on the scene, the residents from that neighborhood, those who witnessed the incident, those were the folks that I interacted with while there. Those were not the same people that we later interacted with later on, left that scene. Really different group of folks and, quite frankly, demographics that we saw there. And I heard from community some of the same frustrations expressed as well.
Okay. And my other question is for Mayor Kenney. Chad Wolf, the acting secretary of DHS, has said he's offered support for the city to drastically stop this again. What are your thoughts and response to that?
I'm not aware of any support. I did read something that the president was going to monitor, quote unquote, the situation. We've been dealing with Governor Wolf for additional assets, and we always deal with our federal partners in law enforcement at the FBI, at ATF, and the like, in the marshal's office. So we have an ongoing relationship with them. They help us process evidence. They help us with many different things when it comes to intelligence and the like. So we have a great relationship. Our commissioner and command staff have a great relationship with the local federal authorities, and we'll continue to do that. And President's welcome to monitor anything he likes, and we'll continue to deal with Governor Wolf for additional assets if we need them.
All right. Finally today, Michaela Winberg.
A quick question for Commissioner Outlaw. Does the department have a civil unrest plan? And if it does, what time last night was it put into action to respond to protests or looting?
Yes, so this completely caught us off guard in the sense that, one, no one can predict that there is an officer-involved shooting. And two, once we arrived there, we saw that there would be civil unrest because it was beginning to unfold upon our arrival there. Once that happened, we immediately began to put resources in place, ensuring that there was a request made to open the EOC where I am now, extending shifts, canceling days off, pressing the button for mutual aid, having conversation with other stakeholders in city administration to ensure that all of perspectives were being met. And that's where we are now. So the answer is yes, there is a plan. It just so happens, again, we're also planning for any pre, during, and post unrest that may occur as it relates to elections. So a lot of key people are already available and at the table. And that's where we are now. So yes, there are plans, and we continue to build as things unfold. But I want to be very clear in that what happened yesterday afternoon, well into last night and into the morning, none of which was planned.
Sure. So do you recall what time it was that the plan was put into action?
We immediately began to mobilize our resources upon our arrival to the scene of the officer-involved shooting. Seeing that there were a lot of angry residents there, there were a lot of voices that needed to be heard, and generally our first step, aside from containing the area, would be to call our civil affairs unit. And that's what happened almost immediately. And we went from there. So early afternoon.
Okay, thank you.
Or early evening, I should say. You're welcome.
Sure, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Outlaw and others. We will advise if future avails are planned on this topic. Otherwise, please send any questions or requests for comment to press@phila.gov. Thanks.